Now let's look at Dickinson's poem, This is my letter to the world. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me, the simple news that nature told with tender majesty. Her message is committed to hands I cannot see, for love of her, sweet countrymen, judge tenderly of me. This poem is believed to have been written in the year 1863, the year Emily Dickinson began to send her poetry to Thomas Wentworth Higginson, a minister, a writer, and editor. Although Higginson didn't succeed in helping Emily Dickinson publish her poems during her lifetime, he did offer her advice and support throughout her prolific writing career. And this poem was finally published 4 years after Dickinson's death in a collection edited by Higginson called Poems by Emily Dickinson in 1890. And this poem is strikingly descriptive of her literary career. Although Dickinson wrote 1,800 poems, only a dozen were published anonymously during her lifetime. And those were all altered by editors who didn't comprehend Dickinson's unconventional poetic style. Dickinson might have been frustrated by the poor reception of her work from her contemporaries, but she believed that a true genius is often misunderstood in its own time. As the poem indicates, Dickinson kept writing her poetry with the confidence that someday its proper audience will judge tenderly of me. So she says in the poem, "This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me." These two opening lines give us an impression that the poet is well aware of the indifference of the world. The poet-speaker is isolated. She is shut away from the world that she sends her letter to. The simple news that nature told with tender majesty. What does the simple news refer to? Why is nature capitalized? If the simple news refers to my letter, this poem, then nature is of course personified and tells me the simple news before the poet writes it down in her letter, her poem to the world. The simple news therefore refers to both the poet's letter, her poem, and nature's news. And this is perhaps the way Dickinson identifies herself with nature. Her letter to the world, from which she is shut away, will be able to transmit such news about nature as she has perhaps received through her senses. It seems as if nature tells her the simple news tenderly and majestically, splendidly, wonderfully, terrifically, or marvelously. And the poet-speaker just takes down the tender news told by nature in her letter to the world. Her message is committed to hands I cannot see. Her message refers to nature's message. But why is her message transmitted to people she cannot see? Some critics argue that Dickinson didn't write for publication. She even says in one of her early poems that publication is an option. But in the last two lines, the poet feels confident that her sweet countrymen will judge of her poetry tenderly, because they all love nature and its message. So she says, "For love of her, sweet countrymen, judge tenderly of me." Perhaps we can also say that although Dickinson is well aware of the indifference of her countrymen, she begs them to judge tenderly of her poetry. But this reading leads to another interpretation of this poem. The poem perhaps reflects the poet's contradictory attitude toward fame. She says that publication is an auction, but here she implores her countrymen to judge her poetry tenderly. So Dickinson is sometimes a person we find it difficult to figure out.